The Supreme Court of the United States has just delivered a judicial blow that has effectively closed the era of Donald Trump's legal immunity, leaving the former president and his entire legal team in a state of total and irreparable shock. We are witnessing a decisive historic moment that almost no one in Trump's circle truly imagined would happen. For years, the tactic has consisted of delaying, appealing, and hoping that slow judicial mechanisms would consume the available time. But as of this morning, the clock has not only run out, it has been completely pulverized. The highest court in the country has issued a one-line ruling that carries more force than 1,000 pages of legal opinions. Petition denied. With those two words, the last possible avenue of appeal has been sealed. There are no further motions to be filed. There are no more emergency stays to be demanded. The appeals process has formally concluded, and Donald Trump now faces the brink of immediate accountability. Before we examine the devastating mechanism of this final verdict and detail why sources indicate that Trump is sunk in absolute panic at Mar-a-Lago, take a moment to press the subscribe button, turn on alerts, and like this video. If you are looking for uncensored information about these courtroom clashes with data that traditional media usually ignore, you've come to the right place. Join our rapidly growing community so you don't miss any developments as this extraordinary phase of enforcement begins. Let's break down the setup of this disastrous ruling in a decision that legal experts and constitutional historians are already calling the most significant rebuke of a former president in U.S. history. The Supreme Court has refused to hear Trump's final appeal regarding his claim of total presidential immunity. That was his last desperate play, the assertion that a president cannot be tried for any action taken while in office. Trump's lawyers had staked everything on that card. They thought that even if they lost in lower courts, the Supreme Court, with its conservative majority, would at least grant them a hearing, a process that might take months or even years. Instead, the justices dismissed the case instantly. They didn't even schedule oral arguments. They simply let the lower court ruling stand, a decision that clearly stated that a former president is not a monarch and must answer to the criminal laws of the United States just like any ordinary person. This is not an ordinary dismissal. It is an outright rejection of the unitary executive doctrine that Trump has used as a shield for decades. The speed of the consequences is what makes this moment so explosive. Normally, when the Supreme Court dismisses a case, there is a procedural grace period before the lower court's mandate takes effect. That is, the official directive to resume the process or enforce the sentence. But in a move that has stunned legal analysts, the Supreme Court ordered that the judgment be applied immediately. In legal terms, immediately means right now, which implies that there is no gap. The pause that had frozen criminal proceedings has evaporated in a second. Special counsel Jack Smith has a clear path to move to trial without delay. The judge in New York can execute the sentence. The judicial dam has broken, and the flood is hitting everything at once. Trump woke up today thinking he had months left to maneuver. Tonight, he will go to bed knowing that jury selection could begin as soon as next week. The atmosphere at Mar-a-Lago is, according to reports, one of apocalyptic bewilderment. Sources close to the former president describe him as stunned, unable to process that the very justices he appointed, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, did not step in to rescue him. He saw the Supreme Court as his ultimate lifeline, his final bulwark against the establishment. Realizing that the court has deserted him is a psychological blow that hurts more than any electoral defeat. There are reports of heated arguments between Trump and his top lawyers, with Trump blaming them for not presenting the right arguments. But legal specialists agree it wasn't the lawyer's fault. It was the law. There is no constitutional basis for claiming that a president can commit crimes without punishment, and the Supreme Court was not going to sacrifice its own credibility to shield one individual. This ruling also unleashes a brutal financial crisis for Trump's campaign. Up to now, they have raised millions of dollars by promising to fight the persecution all the way to the Supreme Court. They assured donors that the High Court would finally vindicate them. That story has evaporated. How do you ask for money to fund an appeal that has already been rejected? Fundraising messages will have to shift from "help me resist" to "help me pay my legal debts before I'm locked up." That is a much harder sell. Signs of donor fatigue are already visible, with key contributors quietly closing their wallets. They know a losing battle when they see one. The Supreme Court tactic was his only tactic. Without it, the campaign turns into a zombie entity. It moves, but it's dead inside. Let's go deeper into the precise text of the lower court ruling that now governs the country. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals issued a sharp opinion that dismantled every one of Trump's claims. They wrote that President Donald Trump has become Citizen Trump with all the protections of any other criminal defendant, but that any executive immunity that might have shielded him while he occupied the presidency no longer protects him in this litigation. By refusing to review the appeal, the Supreme Court has effectively endorsed that text. They have cemented the principle that no one is above the law. This precedent will endure in history, but for Trump, the historical record is the least of his worries. What concerns him is the concrete possibility of a cell in a federal prison. Without immunity, the evidence against him in the January 6th case and the classified documents case is overwhelming. His defensive line was never, "I didn't do it." His line was, "I had the right to do it." That line has now died. The panic in Washington extends beyond Trump's inner core. It is spreading across the Republican establishment. For months, Republican Party leaders have dodged questions about Trump's legal troubles by saying, "We need to let the appeals process play out." It was a useful pretext to avoid taking a stand. Well, the appeals process has played out. It's over. Now every senator and representative has to answer a simple question. The Supreme Court has cleared the way for the trial of a former president. Do you support the rule of law, or do you support a criminal defendant? They can no longer hide behind procedural delays. The clear choice is here. We're seeing senators duck reporters in Capitol hallways because they have no answer. They're afraid of offending the Trump base, but they're also afraid of being tied to a convicted felon. George Will, the conservative analyst who has watched the decay of the Republican Party with growing alarm, recently stepped in to frame this moment. "This is the end of the road," Will declared. The illusion that Donald Trump is the victim of a corrupt judicial apparatus has been demolished by the very institution conservatives revere: the Supreme Court. The evasions, the delays, the distractions, everything has crashed into the wall of certainty. The Republican Party must now decide whether it is a party of law and order or a personality cult devoted to protecting one man's lawlessness. The court has done its duty. Now voters must do theirs. The legal dynamics of what comes next are relentlessly efficient. The case goes back to Judge Tanya Chutkan in Washington, D.C. Judge Chutkan has made it clear that she intends to bring this case to trial as quickly as possible. She has previously stated that the public deserves a speedy trial just as much as the defendant does. We could see a scheduling hearing within 48 hours. The trial date that had been suspended while the appeal was pending will return to the calendar. And because the Supreme Court waited until now to rule, the pause ends right in the heart of the general election campaign. Trump will be forced to spend his days in a courtroom in Washington, D.C., listening to testimony about his attempt to subvert the election instead of campaigning in swing states. The image of a presidential candidate sitting at the defendant's table day after day is a political disaster no strategist can fully counter. But the risk to Trump goes far beyond his schedule. The strength of this ruling means that the evidence compiled by the special counsel is fully usable. There is no longer any room for arguments about executive privilege shielding his conversations with advisors. The courts have held that privilege evaporates in the face of a criminal investigation. That means witnesses like Mark Meadows, Mike Pence, and others can be compelled to testify without limitation. Trump's worst fear has always been that his inner circle would turn on him. With the shield of immunity gone, there is no legal reason for them to stay quiet. They are no longer protecting the presidency. They are protecting their own integrity against perjury charges. The psychological cost for Donald Trump is the wild card in this scenario. He has operated his entire life on the premise that he can always negotiate, always appeal. There is always a way out. He has never faced a moment where the exit is truly blocked. That creates a level of mental dissonance that is dangerous. Reports from the team indicate he is oscillating between depression and explosive rage. He feels betrayed by the system he thought he controlled. This mindset makes him unstable. It is likely we'll see even more radical rhetoric on Truth Social, attacks on judges, attacks on prosecutors, maybe even calls for civil unrest. The judicial apparatus is anticipating this. Marshals are being deployed. Security is being reinforced. The system knows that a cornered beast is the most dangerous, and Trump is more cornered now than ever in his life. This ruling also carries global repercussions. Allies and rivals around the world are watching. They see that the U.S. legal system has the backbone to hold its own former head of state accountable. It signals that the United States remains a nation of laws, not of men. But it also ushers in a period of extreme instability. A key presidential candidate effectively on trial for crimes against the state, the spectacle of that trial will dominate the global news cycle for months. It will weaken the United States on the international stage in the short term because domestic turmoil takes precedence over diplomacy. It is said that diplomats are sending cables back home, warning that the United States is entering a period of internal litigation without precedent. Let's examine the bleak landscape facing Trump. With the appeal dismissed, if he is found guilty, he faces mandatory incarceration. The charges against him, conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding, carry sentences of up to 20 years. Sentencing guidelines for a defendant of his stature who has shown no remorse and has attacked the court would likely recommend substantial prison time. There is no home confinement at Mar-a-Lago for these crimes. According to reports, the Secret Service has already begun preliminary conversations with the Bureau of Prisons about the logistics of protecting a former president. Think about that. The Secret Service planning how to safeguard a former head of state inside a federal prison. That is where we are. That is the reality the Supreme Court has just unleashed. The media ecosystem is in meltdown as it processes how quickly this has moved. For months, legal commentators predicted that the Supreme Court would take the case, that it might delay things until after the election. They were wrong. The court acted decisively. Now, the hosts on CNN and MSNBC are scrambling to rewrite their scripts. The narrative will shift from "will he be tried" to "when will he be convicted?" The imminence of the trial changes everything. It changes polling. It changes the balance of donors. It changes the vice presidential selection. Who wants to be the running mate of someone who might be sworn in from a cell? The toxicity of Trump's candidacy has just escalated exponentially. We also have to consider the reaction of the promoters of the deep state narrative. They are already presenting this as the ultimate confirmation of the conspiracy. The Supreme Court is bought, the system is rigged. But that claim rings hollow when the court is dominated by conservatives, three of whom Trump himself appointed. If the deep state controls Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, the concept has no meaning left. This is the collapse of the conspiracy hypothesis. It does not explain why strict constructionist judges read the Constitution and found no provision permitting the president to act however he pleases. The conceptual bankruptcy of the MAGA doctrine is exposed. As we move into the enforcement phase, things will get rough. Trump will likely try to fire his lawyers again. He will attempt to file frivolous motions to postpone the date. He might even try to boycott the trial, but Judge Chutkan has the authority to compel his presence. She can issue a bench warrant. The image of federal agents escorting a former president to court is unprecedented, but we are getting closer to it day by day. The Supreme Court has effectively said, "We're done. It's your move now, Judge Chutkan," and she is ready to proceed. The silence of the other Republican candidates is telling. Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, before dropping out, all moved cautiously. Now there could be a pivot. If Trump is destined for the courtroom during the general election, the case for an alternative plan gains strength. "I am the candidate who won't be going to prison." It's a powerful slogan. Party power brokers will be gathering in back rooms this week, terrified that they are sleepwalking into a historic wipeout. If Trump is the nominee while sitting at the defendant's table, the urgency to replace him at the convention could intensify, triggering a brokered convention and open party warfare. There is also the financial angle of this appellate shutdown. Trump has posted bonds in civil matters, but criminal cases bleed cash in a different way. Legal fees are astronomical, and now that the delay phase is over, the trial phase begins. Trials cost fortunes. They need legal consultants, expert witnesses, fact witnesses, travel for the legal team, lodging for staff in D.C., all adding up to millions per month. And the Republican National Committee has already hinted at reluctance to cover criminal defense costs. Trump faces a liquidity crisis just when he needs cash most. Financial pressure is tightening in sync with legal pressure. Let's talk about the jury. The trial will be in D.C. Trump hates that. He got about 5% of the vote there. He knows a District of Columbia jury is unlikely to be sympathetic. That's why he fought so hard to move the venue or dismiss the case. The Supreme Court's denial seals his fate on location. He will be tried in the city he tried to strip of its rights. There is a certain poetry in that, but for Trump, it's a nightmare. He believes the jury will be biased against him and will shout it from the rooftops. But the law is the law. You are tried where the crime was committed, and the crime of attempting to overthrow the government took place in Washington, D.C. The ripple effects of this ruling will touch every facet of American life. It reinforces institutional strength, but guarantees a turbulent year. The 2024 election will be a referendum not just on policy platforms, but on the rule of law itself. Trump will present himself as a heroic outlaw, a martyr. Biden will present himself as guardian of the institutions. The Supreme Court has set the stage for this clash. By stepping back, they have pushed the country toward the most unstable election since 1860. And for voters who are just now tuning in, the average citizen who doesn't track every court filing, they are about to see breaking news banners that say, "Supreme Court rejects Trump appeal." That cuts through the noise. That sounds final. It pierces the fog and tells the low information voter, Trump lost, and in America, nobody backs a loser. The aura of invulnerability is the strong man's most precious asset. Once punctured, Once the courts treat him like an ordinary offender, the mystique dissolves. The Supreme Court has accomplished something else today. They have rescued their own image. Public trust in the court had hit historic lows. If they had granted Trump immunity or dragged out the case, they would have looked like political actors. By dismissing it, they have reaffirmed their independence. They have shown loyalty to the Constitution, not to a party. This could restore some judicial credibility, even as it enrages the MAGA base. It was a calculated move by Chief Justice Roberts to preserve the institution he leads. He knows that a court that elevates a president above the law is a court that has destroyed itself. So this is the landscape. The Supreme Court has ruled. The final appeal has expired. Donald Trump is out of options, out of time, and out of excuses. The legal shield he wielded for 50 years has shattered. He now stands exposed before justice. The trial is coming, the evidence is coming, the witnesses are coming, and nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop them. The system has finally caught up with the man who believed he could outrun it forever. This is the moment when the truth surfaces. We are about to find out whether the American experiment can withstand the test of putting a former president on trial. The weeks ahead will be full of noise and rage, but the underlying reality is silent and unbreakable. The law governs everyone. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. We will cover the trial day by day. We will break down testimony, evidence, and frantic defense maneuvers. Mainstream media will give you headlines, will give you certainty. The era of delay has ended. The era of accountability has begun. Don't look away. History is happening now.